After 19 years of patrolling I-70 through the Eisenhower Tunnel, Trooper Jake Morrison's knowledge of the 1.7-mile bore through the Continental Divide was called into question when he received a call at 11:47 p.m. on a February night. An anxious motorist reported seeing wrong passengers, those who weren't in the cars when they entered the tunnel, emerging from vehicles inside. "This is Morrison, dispatch. I'm on Eisenhower heading west. What specifically was reported by the caller? Sandra Hayes is the caller, and she is operating a Honda Accord. She claims that she was by herself when she went into the tunnel. 3 people were seated in her back seat when she glanced in her rearview mirror halfway through." At the west portal, she stopped and refused to turn around. Morrison had heard many tunnel tales. The claustrophobic darkness tricked weary drivers, and the thin air at 11,000 feet altitude produced hallucinations. However, Hayes's voice on the 911 call recording sounded more like true fear than altitude sickness. He discovered her car, with its hazard lights flashing, parked on the shoulder just outside the west entrance of the tunnel. With both hands on the steering wheel and his gaze fixed on the road, Hayes sat motionless in the driver's seat. Morrison stepped closer, observing that although the car's interior lights were on, all of her windows were up. "My name is Trooper Morrison, ma'am. Are you able to exit the car? Are they still there?" Her voice could hardly be heard. "The trio occupying my rear seat." "Are they still present?" Through the rear window, Morrison shone his flashlight. There was nobody in the back seat. "Your car is empty, ma'am." "It's only you. Examine the footwells beneath the seats." They were present. 3 individuals. A woman and 2 men. When I first entered the tunnel, they weren't there. But when I looked up halfway through, I saw that they were simply sitting there. Not moving, not speaking, merely looking at my head's back. Morrison checked carefully and opened the back door. No one was hiding, and there was no proof that anyone had been present. However, Hayes was so terrified that she was unable to release the steering wheel due to her hands shaking so much. "Ma'am, have you been drinking? Taking any medications?" "I'm a nurse." "I work at Denver General. I'm completely sober. I know what I saw. Those people were in my car." Morrison was about to chalk it up to altitude-induced hallucination when his radio crackled with another call. "Different driver? Same report." A man in a pickup truck claiming that when he exited the tunnel, there was a child in his passenger seat that hadn't been there when he entered. Then another call. And another. Within 20 minutes, 4 separate drivers had pulled over at the tunnel exits, all reporting the same phenomenon. Passengers appearing in their vehicles during the transit through the tunnel. Passengers who vanished by the time State Patrol arrived. "Dispatch, this is Morrison. I need backup at both tunnel portals. We have a situation." Trooper Nicole Chen arrived from the east side with 2 of the affected drivers. Their stories were consistent and disturbing. All had entered the tunnel alone. All reported seeing additional passengers appear during transit. All described the passengers as silent, motionless, and somehow wrong, features that didn't quite align properly, movements that seemed slightly off sync with normal human motion. "It's the altitude," Chen suggested. "Mass hysteria triggered by oxygen deprivation." But Morrison wasn't convinced. The Eisenhower Tunnel had been operational since 1973. Millions of vehicles had passed through without incident. Why would 4 unrelated drivers all experience identical hallucinations on the same night? "I'm going through," Morrison decided. "Full dash cam recording, body cam active. If something's happening in that tunnel, we need documentation." He entered the tunnel alone at 12:34 a.m. The transit time should have been approximately 4 minutes at normal speed. Morrison drove slowly, watching his mirrors, his dashcam recording everything. At the 1-mile mark, his vehicle's electronics flickered. The dashcam showed static for approximately 3 seconds. And when the image cleared, his rearview mirror reflected something that shouldn't have been possible. A woman sat in his back seat. She wore clothing from a different era, a dress that might have been from the 1970s. Her hair was styled in a way that hadn't been fashionable in decades, and she sat with perfect stillness, hands folded in her lap, staring at the back of Morrison's head, with eyes that didn't blink. Morrison's training took over. He kept driving, kept his voice calm, but reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I have an unauthorized passenger in my vehicle. Female, approximately 30 years old, appeared in back seat during tunnel transit." The woman didn't react to his transmission. Didn't move, didn't speak, just continued that unblinking stare. "Ma'am, I need you to identify yourself. How did you enter this vehicle?" No response. Morrison glanced again at his mirror, and the woman's eyes were now visible in reflection. Completely black, no whites, no iris definition. Just solid darkness where eyes should have been. He accelerated toward the tunnel exit. The dashcam caught everything. The silent passenger, the impossible appearance, the unnatural stillness. As his vehicle emerged into the night air, Morrison immediately looked back. Empty. The back seat was completely empty, but the dashcam recording showed something else. In the final second before exiting the tunnel, the woman had turned her head to look directly at the camera. And on the recording, her mouth moved, forming words that had no sound. "We've been waiting so long." Chen met Morrison at the west portal. They reviewed the dash cam footage together, watching the impossible passenger appear, sit in perfect stillness, and then look directly at the camera before vanishing. "That's not possible," Chen whispered. "People don't just materialize in locked vehicles." "But we have it on camera. Multiple witnesses. This isn't hallucination or altitude sickness." They interviewed the 4 original callers more thoroughly. Details emerged that made the situation even stranger. The passengers all seemed to be from different time periods, clothing styles from the 70s, 80s, 90s, even one description that sounded like 1950s fashion. All had the same unnaturally still posture, the same silent observation, the same black eyes visible only in mirrors. Detective Palmer arrived from Denver with historical records of the tunnel. What he found was disturbing. The Eisenhower Tunnel took 5 years to build, from 1968 to 1973. 7 workers died during construction. Cave-ins, equipment failures, 1 unexplained disappearance. But there are also unconfirmed reports of vehicles going missing during the first years after opening, cars that entered the tunnel but never exited. How many? Official records? 0. But I found newspaper archives, missing persons reports. At least 23 vehicles and 41 people vanished on I-70 between 1973 and 1976, all in this area. The incidents stopped after 1976, but the missing people were never found. You think they're still in the tunnel somehow? Palmer pulled up engineering diagrams. The tunnel is 1.7 miles long, bored through solid rock at 11,000 feet elevation. But according to original survey maps, there are geological anomalies, cavities in the mountain that weren't excavated, spaces that shouldn't exist based on the rock formations. Over the following week, the passenger sightings continued. Only at night, only during the overnight hours between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., drivers would enter the tunnel alone and exit alone. But during transit, impossible passengers would appear, silent, still, watching with eyes that turned black in reflections. The State Patrol set up a task force. They installed additional cameras throughout the tunnel, brought in engineers to inspect for structural issues, consulted with psychologists about mass hallucination. But the phenomenon couldn't be explained away. Too many witnesses, too much video evidence, too many consistent details. Something was using the Eisenhower Tunnel as a doorway, appearing to drivers in transit, observing them with inhuman patience. Morrison returned to the tunnel regularly, always alone, always recording. On his 7th transit, the woman appeared again. This time he tried to communicate. "Who are you?" "What do you want?" The woman's mouth moved. No sound, but Morrison could read the words on her lips. "We died here. Trapped between entry and exit. The mountain took us and won't let go. The construction workers? The missing drivers? All of us, caught in the space between. The tunnel is more than rock and concrete. It's a wound in the mountain, and we're the blood that won't stop flowing. How do we help you?" The woman's expression changed for the first time, shifting to something that might have been sadness, or might have been something humans didn't have adequate emotional vocabulary to describe. "You can't. We're recordings now, echoes trapped in stone. Every vehicle that passes through triggers our appearance. We're condemned to sit in back seats forever, watching drivers who can't hear us, trying to warn them." Warn them about what? But the tunnel exit was approaching. The woman looked at the camera again, her black eyes reflecting its light, and spoke her final words before vanishing. "The mountain is hollow. It wants more." Morrison emerged from the tunnel to find Chen waiting with urgent news. "We have a missing person. Jeremy Collins, 34, entered the tunnel eastbound at 2:17 a.m. His EZ pass registered entry but never registered exit. His vehicle hasn't been found. They searched the tunnel thoroughly. No vehicle, no wreckage, no sign of Collins or his car. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist somewhere in the 1.7 miles of mountain. But that night, multiple drivers reported a new passenger appearing in their vehicles. A man matching Jeremy Collins's description, sitting silently in back seats, staring with black eyes, mouthing words that couldn't be heard. The mountain had claimed another victim. And like all the others, the construction workers, the missing drivers from the 70s, countless unnamed souls. He was now trapped in the space between entry and exit, condemned to appear to drivers as a silent warning that would never be heard. The State Patrol couldn't close the tunnel. It was a vital transportation corridor carrying thousands of vehicles daily. They could only add warnings about driving at night, increase patrols, and try to document the impossible. Morrison continued his overnight shifts, continued driving through the tunnel, continued encountering the passengers. Each time, he'd try to communicate, try to understand. And slowly, a pattern emerged. The passengers only appeared to solo drivers. If there was even one other person in the vehicle, the phenomenon didn't manifest. It was as if the tunnel, or whatever existed in the spaces between its walls, could only interact with isolated consciousness, with drivers alone in their vehicles, vulnerable to perception-altering effects. It's not the passengers that are impossible, Palmer theorized. It's the tunnel itself. The construction process, the blasting through solid mountain at high altitude, something about it created thin spots in reality, places where the boundary between existing and not existing becomes permeable. Are you saying the tunnel is haunted? I'm saying the tunnel is wrong, not in a supernatural sense, but in a physical one. We carved a hole through a mountain that should have remained solid, and the mountain responded. It trapped those who died during its wounding, and it continues to trap those who pass through alone, turning them into eternal passengers. Morrison made one final journey through the tunnel, this time with a specific purpose. He'd researched the names of all 7 construction workers who died. At the tunnel's midpoint, where the passengers always appeared, he stopped his vehicle and spoke their names aloud. James Patterson, Michael Torres, David Chen, Robert Williams, Carlos Martinez, Thomas Anderson, John Sullivan. I know you're here. I know you're trapped. I'm sorry we wounded the mountain and took you with it. The temperature in his vehicle dropped 20 degrees. All the passengers appeared at once, not just the 7 workers, but dozens of them. Every back seat, passenger seat, even the cargo area of his patrol vehicle filled with silent, still figures. All of them watching him with black eyes, all of them mouthing the same words, "Close the tunnel." But Morrison knew that was impossible. The Eisenhower Tunnel would remain open, carrying commerce and travelers through the Continental Divide. And the passengers would remain too, trapped in the mountain's wound, appearing to solo drivers during overnight hours, sitting in silent observation, trying desperately to communicate warnings that would never be adequately heard. Morrison retired 6 months later. He couldn't continue patrolling a highway he knew was fundamentally wrong, couldn't keep encountering the trapped souls in the tunnel, couldn't rescue them or help them or even fully understand what they'd become. The phenomenon continues. If you drive through the Eisenhower Tunnel alone between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., you might glance in your rearview mirror and see additional passengers. They'll sit perfectly still, watching you with eyes that turn black in reflection, mouthing words you can't hear but should understand. We're trapped between entry and exit. The mountain won't let go, and someday it might claim you too. Trooper Nicole Chen had reconstructed hundreds of accidents during her decade with Colorado State Patrol. But the scene she found on Highway 285 at 2:33 a.m. on a March morning defied every principle of physics and injury mechanics she'd learned. Multiple callers reported a devastating multi-vehicle collision near Kenosha Pass, complete with injured victims screaming for help. But when Chen arrived with emergency services, they found something impossible. The accident was real. 3 vehicles with catastrophic damage, debris scattered across both lanes, fluids leaking, airbags deployed. But there were no victims, no drivers, no passengers, no bodies anywhere on scene. Dispatch, this is Chen. We have damaged vehicles but no patients, requesting K-9 unit and expanded search. The lead ambulance paramedic approached her with visible confusion. Trooper, we got here 4 minutes after the first 911 call. The callers described people screaming, trapped in wreckage, visible injuries. Where are they? Chen examined the vehicles more closely. A sedan with its front end completely crushed, steering wheel bent from impact, blood on the airbag. But no driver. A pickup truck rolled onto its side, driver's door torn off, more blood inside. But no driver. A minivan with rear-end damage so severe it had compressed the vehicle by 4 feet, child safety seats visible inside. But no children, no parents, no bodies. Start a grid search, check the tree line, ravines, anywhere victims might have wandered in shock. But something was bothering Chen. She'd worked accident reconstruction long enough to read impact dynamics. The damage patterns suggested extreme force, speeds over 70 miles per hour, violent collisions that should have caused fatalities. Yet the blood spatter patterns were wrong. Not arterial spray or impact splatter, but more like stage blood carefully applied to create the impression of injury. Trooper Chen, you need to hear this. Detective Palmer had been interviewing the 911 callers. All 4 witnesses described the same thing. They saw the accident happen, saw vehicles crash, saw victims bleeding and screaming for help. But here's the strange part. They all say the victims looked directly at them before vanishing. Vanishing? Direct quote from Witness 1. The woman trapped in the sedan was screaming, covered in blood. I ran to help her. She looked right at me and said, "It hasn't happened yet." Then she disappeared. The blood disappeared. Everything disappeared except the wrecked cars. Chen felt her skin prickle. She examined the sedan again with new perspective. The damage was real, the deployed airbag was real, but the blood she'd seen. She wiped her glove across it. The substance came away clear, like water that had been colored red but was now reverting to transparency. Palmer, something's very wrong here. These vehicles are damaged, but I don't think the accident has happened yet. What do you mean, hasn't happened yet? The cars are wrecked. The damage is real, but it's future damage. Look at the impact patterns. The vehicles haven't physically collided with each other. The deformation angles don't align, but they show damage consistent with accidents that will happen. Over the next hour, as they documented the scene, more impossible details emerged. The vehicle's computer systems showed impact times of 2:47 a.m., 14 minutes after Chen had arrived on scene. The event data recorders registered collisions that hadn't occurred yet, and as they watched, the damage began to intensify, as if the vehicles were catching up to their already destroyed future state. We're seeing the aftermath before the cause, Palmer realized. These vehicles are showing damage from accidents that are about to happen, and the victims we're seeing are future versions of people who are about to die. That's impossible. So are blood patterns that disappear, victims that vanish, and damage that increases while we watch. Something at this location is causing time to fold back on itself. We're seeing effects before causes, witnessing accidents before they happen. Chen made a decision. We need to close this section of highway. If the accident is about to happen, if real people are about to crash here, we can prevent it. They set up roadblocks at both ends of the affected zone. Chen positioned herself at the northern block, watching the highway that was now empty, except for 3 wrecked vehicles that shouldn't exist yet. At 2:44 a.m., headlights appeared. A sedan matching the damaged vehicle, approaching at normal highway speed. Chen activated her lights and sirens, signaling the driver to stop. The driver pulled over. A woman, approximately 35, looking confused. "Officer, what's wrong?" "Ma'am, I need you to turn around. There's a dangerous situation ahead." "But I need to get to Denver." "I have an early morning flight." Chen looked at her vehicle. Exactly the same make, model, and color as the wrecked sedan, quarter-mile ahead. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Jennifer Ross. Is something wrong?" "Jennifer Ross. The same name on the registration of the wrecked sedan. This was the driver whose future blood Chen had seen on the future airbag, whose future screams had been reported by witnesses. Miss Ross, I need you to trust me. Do not proceed down this highway. Turn around and take an alternate route. But the GPS says..." At exactly 2:47 a.m., the sound of catastrophic impact echoed down the highway. Impossible, because no vehicles had entered the restricted zone. But when Chen looked, the 3 wrecked vehicles had transformed. The damage was now fresh, the airbags newly deployed, and there were bodies. Real bodies. Jennifer Ross lay slumped against the sedan's deployed airbag, blood covering her face. But Jennifer Ross was also standing next to Chen, staring in horror at her own corpse a quarter-mile away. That's me," Jennifer whispered. "How can that be me?" The pickup truck's driver hung from his seatbelt, neck obviously broken. The minivan's back seat held 2 child safety seats, both empty, but 2 small bodies lay in the grass beside the wreckage, thrown from the vehicle during the rollover. "The accident happened," Palmer said over the radio, "exactly at the time the event data recorders predicted. But the vehicles that crashed aren't the ones we were watching. These are different vehicles, different license plates. It's like the accident was always going to happen at this time and location, regardless of whether the specific vehicles were present." Chen approached the wrecks cautiously. The bodies were real, terribly injured, but as she got closer they began to fade. First becoming translucent, then disappearing entirely, leaving only empty wrecked vehicles that themselves began to shimmer and lose cohesion. "They're not real," Jennifer Ross said from behind her. "That's not really me. That's the version of me that exists in the timeline where I didn't stop. The accident is showing us what would have happened. But the damage is real. The vehicles are physical. Are they?" Palmer examined the sedan that supposedly held Jennifer's body. As he touched it, his hand passed partially through the metal, as if it existed in a state between solid and holographic. "I don't think these are real vehicles. I think they're temporal echoes. The highway is showing us possible futures, probable accidents. This specific location, something about the geology or energy fields, it causes time to loop back on itself." Over the following weeks, Chen and Palmer investigated Kenosha Pass's history. They found dozens of documented accidents at this specific stretch of highway dating back to the 1950s when it was first paved. Unusual numbers of fatal crashes, many with witnesses reporting impossible details. Victims seen before accidents occurred, wreckage appearing before collisions, warnings from future victims who then vanished. "It's a temporal loop," an FBI specialist named Foster explained when he arrived to investigate. "Certain geographic locations develop what we call causal inversions. Effects precede causes, futures influence pasts. Kenosha Pass is one of the strongest we've documented. The accidents that will happen here echo backward in time, becoming visible before they occur. Can we prevent them?" "You did. Jennifer Ross didn't crash because you stopped her, but the accident still happened in the timeline where she didn't stop. Both timelines exist simultaneously at this location. That's why you see the wreckage. It's real in one timeline, ghostly in another." "How many timelines?" "Potentially infinite. Every possible accident at this location exists in quantum superposition until observed. When you blocked the road, you collapsed Jennifer's timeline into one where she survived. But the accident timeline still exists, showing you what would have happened." Chen couldn't process the implications. If accidents existed in probability states before occurring, if timelines branched at every decision point, then every crash scene potentially held dozens or hundreds of ghost victims from alternate timelines where slightly different choices led to slightly different outcomes. She continued patrolling Highway 285, but now saw every accident scene differently. The victims she pulled from wreckage. Were they from her timeline or another? The crashes she prevented, did they still happen in parallel realities? And the ghostly victims witnesses reported seeing, were they warning from probable futures, trying to prevent their own deaths by reaching back through time? The phantom accident on Kenosha Pass remained unsolved in official records. The wrecked vehicles had vanished by morning, leaving only evidence photos that showed vehicles becoming translucent, victims fading from existence, blood disappearing like water evaporating. Chen kept the photos in a classified file labeled Causal Inversion, Event, Timeline Collapse. But she never stopped wondering. How many other accidents showed temporal echoes? How many victims existed in probability states, simultaneously dead and alive, trapped in quantum superposition until observation forced their timeline into one reality or another. And every time she responded to a crash scene, she looked for the signs. Victims who appeared before the accident. Blood that seemed too carefully placed. Wreckage that showed damage patterns from collisions that hadn't yet occurred. Because at Kenosha Pass, she'd learned the truth. Accidents didn't just happen in the present. They echoed backward from probable futures, showing themselves to anyone sensitive enough to see the temporal loops. The phantom victims continued appearing to late-night drivers, bloody figures standing on the shoulder, waving for help, injured people in wrecked vehicles that weren't quite solid, screams heard before crashes occurred. All of them warnings from futures that might or might not come to pass, trapped in a location where time folded back on itself and effects preceded causes. Chen eventually transferred from accident reconstruction. She couldn't continue investigating crashes that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously, couldn't help victims who might or might not be real, depending on which probability wave collapsed into observed reality. The work had revealed something she couldn't unknow. That accidents weren't simple cause and effect events, but complex quantum phenomena, where future victims could reach back through time, warning their past selves in desperate attempts to prevent deaths that had already occurred in alternate timelines. Detective Chris Palmer took the missing persons case at 3:15 a.m. on an April morning when multiple hikers failed to return from a popular trail near Pikes Peak. Standard operating procedure suggested hypothermia or injuries, but the search team's report contained details that transformed routine mountain rescue into something far stranger. "Detective, we found them," Search and Rescue Captain Laura Sanders radioed. "All 12 hikers. They're at 14,000 feet, well above tree line. But sir, they're not responding to us. They're just climbing." "Climbing where? The summit?" "No, they're climbing the same section repeatedly, a 50-foot vertical rock face. They reach the top, walk back down to the bottom, and immediately start climbing again. They've been doing this for at least 4 hours. Palmer coordinated helicopter transport to the site. What he found defied every principle of human behavior and high-altitude physiology he knew. The 12 hikers moved in perfect synchronization, scaling the rock face with mechanical precision. They weren't using proper climbing technique, weren't wearing appropriate gear, but ascended the near-vertical surface without difficulty. At the top, they'd pause for exactly 30 seconds, then descend and immediately begin climbing again. "They're not human anymore," one of the search team whispered. Palmer approached the nearest hiker, a woman identified as Sarah Martinez, 34, experienced mountaineer. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her movements precise but uncanny. He touched her shoulder, and she didn't react, just continued climbing. "Sarah Martinez, I'm Detective Palmer. Can you hear me?" No response. She reached the top of the rock face, paused, and began descending. Palmer noticed something that made his blood run cold. She was ascending with perfect efficiency, but descending by walking down the vertical surface as if gravity had rotated 90 degrees for her. "They're all doing it," Sanders pointed out. "Walking down sheer rock like it's a gentle slope." Dr. Mitchell arrived via helicopter with medical equipment. He examined the nearest hiker, a man in his 20s, while the subject continued his mechanical climbing pattern. "Vitals are abnormal. Heart rate is synchronized. All 12 are beating at exactly 42 beats per minute. Respiratory rate is 6 breaths per minute. Body temperature is 89 degrees Fahrenheit. They should be in severe hypothermic crisis, but they're functioning normally." "How is that possible?" "It's not." At 14,000 feet, in these temperatures, With those vitals, they should be unconscious or dead. But they're climbing with superhuman efficiency, as if altitude and cold don't affect them. Palmer watched the 12 hikers continue their endless loop. Climb, pause, descend, repeat. No variation, no fatigue, no acknowledgement of observers. Just perfect mechanical repetition. What happened to them? Mitchell pointed to unusual marks on the hiker's exposed skin. Look at this. Patterns like frostbite, but geometrically precise. And their eyes, the pupils are dilated to maximum, not responding to light. Something has overridden their autonomic nervous systems. Over the next 6 hours, rescue teams attempted every intervention. They physically restrained hikers, carried them away from the rock face, even airlifted one back to base camp. But each time, the affected individuals would pause, become agitated, and if not restrained, would walk directly back to the rock face and resume climbing. They're compelled, Palmer realized. Something is forcing them to climb this specific section repeatedly. Agent Foster arrived from Denver with equipment that suggested he'd expected unusual circumstances. Detective Palmer, we need to evacuate everyone except essential personnel. This isn't altitude sickness. Then what is it? Foster showed Palmer satellite imagery. This mountain has anomalies. Magnetic field variations at specific elevations. We've documented 3 other locations worldwide with similar patterns. And at each site, people exhibiting behavior identical to your hikers. What causes it? We don't know. Best theory is that certain elevations create resonance with human neural patterns. The altitude, combined with specific magnetic fields and atmospheric pressure, creates conditions that can override individual consciousness and impose external patterns. External patterns from what? Foster looked at the climbing hikers. From the mountain itself. We think mountains at these elevations develop something approaching collective consciousness through geological processes. The hikers aren't climbing by choice. They're being used as the mountain's tools, forced to repeat patterns the mountain requires. That's insane. Is it? The hikers have been climbing for 12 hours without rest, food, or water. They're operating at altitudes and temperatures that should kill them. They're defying gravity during descent. Their vital signs are synchronized as if controlled by single external source. Something is puppeting these people, Detective, and that something appears to be the mountain. Palmer authorized full documentation. Footage showed hikers continuing their mechanical climbing loop, their movements becoming more fluid and synchronized. By hour 15, they moved in perfect unison, 12 bodies acting as one, ascending and descending in choreographed precision. They're becoming part of it, Mitchell observed. The mountain is integrating them into its pattern. If we don't intervene soon, they might not be recoverable. But intervention proved impossible. Every attempt to remove hikers from the pattern resulted in violent resistance. When physically carried away, they became catatonic until returned to the rock face, at which point they immediately resumed climbing. We're going to have to let it run its course, Foster decided. Whatever the mountain is doing, it will either release them when the pattern completes, or they'll die here, climbing forever. At hour 23, something changed. The 12 hikers reached the top of the rock face simultaneously, paused for their usual 30 seconds, but instead of descending, they all turned to face east, raising their arms in unison. Then they collapsed. All 12 dropped, as if strings had been cut, falling unconscious but alive. Medical teams rushed in, finding the hikers severely hypothermic, dehydrated, and exhausted, but responsive. As they regained consciousness, none remembered climbing. Their last memories were of starting the hike, reaching approximately 13,000 feet. And then, nothing. 23 hours erased, replaced with blank space. "What were we doing?" Sarah Martinez asked weakly. "Why are we at 14,000 feet?" Palmer showed her video footage of the repetitive climbing. She watched in horror, seeing herself scale vertical rock, walk down sheer surfaces, move with mechanical precision. "That's not me. I would never climb like that. And how did I walk down that rock face? That's impossible." "We don't know. Something at this elevation affected all of you, forced you to repeat a pattern. Do you remember anything unusual before the blank period?" Sarah concentrated. There was singing. Not audible singing, but vibrations. Like the mountain itself was humming at a frequency I could feel in my bones. And then, nothing. Just waking up here. All 12 hikers reported similar experiences. A vibration they felt rather than heard, a sense of the mountain communicating through resonance, and then lost time. None had voluntary control during the climbing period. They'd been conscious but not in control, aware but unable to direct their own actions. They were hijacked, Foster concluded. The mountain imposed its pattern on them, used their bodies to accomplish what? What was the purpose of the climbing? Palmer examined the rock face more carefully. The surface showed unusual wear patterns where the hikers had climbed, grooves and marks that shouldn't form from human contact in just 23 hours. But they matched geological features, as if the hikers had been used to intentionally shape the rock. They were carving something, Mitchell realized. Look at the pattern of grooves. It forms symbols, geometric shapes. The shapes meant nothing to human observers, but Foster took extensive photographs. We've seen this before. At the other elevation anomaly sites, people compelled to create patterns in rock, always at specific altitudes, always following designs they don't consciously understand. "The mountain is writing," Palmer said quietly, "using humans as tools to carve messages into itself. Or it's preparing something. We don't know the purpose, but the patterns are spreading. 3 sites 5 years ago, 17 sites now. More hikers, more climbers, all compelled to create these geometric marks at specific elevations. The 12 hikers recovered physically, but were psychologically changed. All reported continuing to feel the mountain's vibration, a sense of being called back to high altitudes, dreams of climbing endless rock faces and carving patterns they didn't understand." Sarah Martinez returned to the site 3 months later, claiming she needed to finish the pattern. She climbed to 14,000 feet, found the rock face, and for 6 hours carved additional marks with her bare hands, blood running from torn fingers, continuing work the mountain had forced her to begin. Search and rescue brought her down forcibly. Her fingers were severely damaged, but the marks she'd carved matched perfectly with patterns begun during the first compulsion event. "It won't let me go," she told Palmer in the hospital. "I can feel the mountain calling. It needs me to complete something, some vast pattern spread across multiple elevations and multiple climbers. We're all just tools, carving pieces of a message or design too large for any of us to comprehend." Palmer documented 17 more cases over the following year. Hikers and climbers compelled to repeat patterns at specific elevations, carving marks into rock faces, moving with mechanical precision, their individual consciousness overridden by something vast and geological. "The mountains are awakening," Foster told him during a final briefing. "Or they've always been conscious and are only now learning to interact with humans. Either way, anyone who climbs above 13,000 feet risks exposure to these patterns. The altitude creates conditions where human neural activity becomes vulnerable to external influence. Can we stop it? How do you stop mountains? They've been here for millions, Don.